bless your name this morning. We're here to honor you and bless you and be your people, Lord. I am encouraged by what you're doing and growing in each one of our hearts. May we continue to draw closer to you and just continue to be more like you, Father. Lord, we want to bless your purpose and just the meaning of life, Lord. What it means to be your son and what it means to live. Lord, you are our King, you are our Father. May we honor who you are. Work as one body under one head. We bless you and thank you for your love, Father. May we practice that and continue to live like you. Praise in your name. Amen.
Amen. Some of the very things that have been on my heart, Annie. How'd you figure that out? Well, let's move to our next
23.
Analect. Okay. Isaac, if you will read the first part and Esther read the second part.
I got quite the mouthful.
23.
13:23.
Master said, "The gentleman harmonizes and does not merely agree. The petty person agrees, but he does not harmonize."
What is that word? Marcus?
Marquis?
Marquis.
Of G. I returned from a hunt.
It was being attended by Master Yang at the Tuan Pavilion. When Ran Jia came galloping up to them at full speed.
The Martin, I forgot that already.
Mosquito.
Marquis.
The Marquis remarked, "It is only Ran Jue who harmonizes he with
Cool.
me."
It's the Chinese kid.
Master Yan replied,
Ranqiu.
maybe Elijah should read this because he knows all the words. It's a lot.
Well, you're almost through all the words, so Elijah, read this first.
Part again.
There's a lot at the end.
Yeah,
too.
just read the first 4 or 5 lines there.
The Marquis of Qi had returned from a hunt and was being attended by Master Yan at the Tron Pavilion. And Ranqiu came galloping up to them at full speed. The Marquis remarked, "It is only Ranqiu who harmonizes he with me." Master Yan replied, "Certainly Ranqiu agrees, Tong, with you. But how can you say that he harmonizes with you?" How much more do you want me to read?
That's good.
Master Yan answered, "There is a difference. Harmonizing is like cooking soup.
You have water, fire, vinegar, pickle, salt, and plums with which to cook fish and meat. You heat it by means of firewood, and then the cook harmonizes the ingredients, balancing the various flavors, strengthening the taste of whatever is lacking, and moderating the taste of whatever is excessive. Then the gentleman eats it, and it serves to relax his heart. The relationship between Lord and Master is just like this.
Minister.
Minister is just like this. If in what the Lord declares to be acceptable, there is something that is not right, the minister submits to him that it is not right. And in this way, what the Lord declares acceptable is made perfect. If in what the Lord declares to be wrong, there is something that is, in fact, acceptable, the minister submits to him that it is acceptable. And in this way, the inappropriate aspects of what the Lord declares wrong are discarded. In this way, government is perfected, with no infringement upon what is right, and the common people are rendered free of contentiousness. An extended musical metaphor follows, where different notes are brought together and harmonized to please the heart of the gentleman. Now, Ran Chui is not like this. What his Lord declares acceptable, he also declares acceptable. What his Lord declares wrong, he also declares wrong. This is like trying to season water with more water. Who would be willing to eat it? It is like playing nothing but a single note on your zither. Who would want to listen to it? This is why it is not acceptable for a minister to merely agree. For the injury caused but to a state by a minister who merely agrees, also see the 13:15.
Any thoughts?
I think we've talked about it before, but what was the word contentiousness? What does that mean?
Contentiousness?
Yeah.
That's kind of like being in disagreement or,
Okay.
you know. Yeah, kind of like that. It has a little bit of a note of not just simply disagreement, but like disagreeableness between someone or with someone.
This honestly reminds me of something I've been thinking about recently, and not necessarily, I guess, super profound intellectual like concept, but more of just something that like I knew about and that I was starting to observe in my own life, and it kind of made me happy. Was just how I suppose when in congregation with certain people, a certain culture is inevitably always created. I mostly think of like granny's shifts because that's like where I really get the majority of that difference, right?
Mhm.
And I found myself very thankful, particularly for a shift I had with Benji, because I realized that with different words, but applying it to this text, we harmonize with each other in a way that I am very grateful for. Because there have been, you know, a lot of different shifts of which I have been like, you know, not necessarily to say like lacking in a certain way or anything like that, but that he has really pulled me up, you know, and I in sometimes have been able to do the same for him, you know what I mean? And it just really reminds me of like a culture created to where, you know, we are creating this atmosphere where both of us are flourishing and we're creating something special in that way. And it's something that we're both, it's like submitting to something that's beyond yourself, and you're helping each other reach that, if that makes sense. I don't quite know. I'm not using good words to describe it, but it reminded me a lot of this text of just when you are able to interact with someone else in a different way, being able to harmonize with them in that way. And it's not, it sounds dumb, I guess, but I had realized this in my own life recently and was just grateful for it in that way, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like what it's saying towards the end is harmonizing is almost like you're for the same thing or under the same end.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you were to just agree, it would be like seasoning water with water. There is no temperance. You're not sharpening each other because you're just agreeing. That's what it seems to remind me of. Is it's just saying like you can still disagree and you're both kind of working out or using each other to sharpen each other, but that does not mean that you are all the same, but you're for the same thing.
Mm.
So in that way, that's how you're harmonizing, kind of like the soup example, where it seems like a lot of the flavors are clashing, but they end up complementing each other in a way when they're balancing the various flavors.
In that sense, the word disagree doesn't work very well. And I understand your use of it because it's kind of the opposite of agree. And
Yeah.
it's like the difference is to disagree, right? Or the opposing. But we can see that with a Lord and his minister, it's not so much about disagreement, so much as a movement toward the mean or the right way.
Yeah.
And so it is disagreeable, true. In other words, it's not simply, oh, okay, whatever you say I agree with, without any mind or any standard applied there. So there is agreement. I guess what I'm noting is it's not personal agreement, and I know that's not what you're talking about, but it's not like a disagreement between people. It is a disagreement, or that's the note that's being said is that people harmonize but not necessarily agree. And what that means is it's not so much I'm coming against you. That's the way that we typically understand disagreement, right? It's more like, I don't know if that's quite right. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In the same sense that, and I really love this illustration because it's something that Emmanuel not only talked about a lot, in many different occasions. He would talk about, I remember him referencing this illustration of soup, but he really liked cooking soup too, so, and he loved that melding of ingredients. And, I was thinking about, this isn't about Emmanuel, but it was a fleshing out of something in the way that he would do things. Like, I don't like tomatoes very much. But if you've ever worked with Emmanuel, and I'm going to mention this, refer to this is a lot of memory here. My first introduction to Emmanuel was when he was chopping vegetables at the Nyack building, in preparation for one of the Tuesday night Bible studies, and he was, serving in that way, and in the kitchen in there with Dwayne, and I remember him being pretty serious about chopping his vegetables. And then, over the years as I got to know him more, and if you get to if any of you know that as you get to know Emmanuel, cooking was a very important aspect of your relationship with him. And so I never really even recognized this until later on, and then it was too late, really. It was something that I experienced on a few occasions, but I think that others of you got to experience a lot more, and that was actually preparing and cooking with Emmanuel. That was something he enjoyed more than almost anything else to do with someone. And I know some of you got to experience that. Those are some wonderful memories. He would do that with Rachel a lot when he would come over and he would want to cook. Really what he wanted to do was prep and talk. He really liked the preparation of things, but he also liked to use a series of ingredients. So I said a moment ago, I don't like tomatoes, but in his egg drop soup, the way that everything melded together and the way that he chopped those tomatoes, not too big, not super small, but they would soften and be seasoned by all of the other ingredients in that soup, and they would lose their, to me, the kind of the acidic aspect of their flavor profile, and they would be like soft and juicy and really tasty in that soup. And so if you think about the different profiles of the various things that go into a soup, it's not necessarily about their clash as if they oppose one another, but it is in the heat and the elements that they are put in together that they become something altogether different. And so the soup is made up of many ingredients, but it is one thing. And very, very interesting to me, even Naomi's prayer, the head, but one body, and the aspect of how things work together. The whole goal here is, of this particular Analect and the conversation that they're having, is in relation to reaching perfection in government or in decision making. So there's a note of humility that must come from the one who is Lord, so the one who's given a certain standing and position of voice and influence over other people, and his minister as one who is serving him for what is together for them a greater purpose. So that's that they're working together unto a greater end than their own agenda, if you could say it. Might be a good way to say it from a governmental standpoint, because this is not so they can meet their own ends, it's so that they can meet an end greater than both of them together. And the assumption is not that the Lord is always perfect in all that he does, but if he's willing to give ear to good counsel, then that can, you see, that enhances. So there might be something bitter by way of herb or spice that you add to a soup, but it complements. If you were to taste it, it would be bitter to the tongue. But once it has time to meld in with the rest of what you're making, then it adds this it opens up the profile and the taste and flavor of the soup. And so the reference is obvious, or the connection is fairly obvious as to what the benefit of not just, I think that some people perceive good counsel as getting everyone's opinion, and even those who oppose you, so that you will have included all things in your consideration. Opposition is not the main goal, because someone who opposes you as a person is and or may be quite different than someone who opposes what you are for, what you are going for, the vision that you have in mind. And that is a very different thing. And that's, I think, part of what's being highlighted here is the difference between harmony and agreement. Because harmony, it's indicating that harmony, it's noting the difference, okay? There cannot be harmony with a single note. So let's move over to the musical aspect of this. There can only be harmony when there are different notes played. And that becomes something that is greater than it was before. A single note can be very powerful and meaningful in the right context. But if I just go over to the piano and strike a singular key, maybe not. If that singular key is struck in the context of a masterful piece of music, then it really may means something. But then when what is added to you, you grow in the breadth and the resonance and frequency of what you are receiving from those musical notes together. Same thing with the soup, you know. If you take a bite of a tomato, well, you're not eating this beautiful soup that is prepared and has tomato in it, but it's not singular ingredient. And so there are, I think, fairly obvious life lessons and relationship lessons and good lessons in counsel and in what unity really looks like. Let's talk for a second about, in a similar manner, what is the difference between unity and uniformity?
Very similar to the difference between harmonizing and agreeing, no? One is coming all in agreement or uniformity with the same principle, the same whatever. It's focusing more about agreeing and all being on the same page rather than what you are actually working towards. No? Or
Yeah.
what's a yeah? I suppose there's a better way to put that, but what was the other one you said? You said uniformity and
Unity and uniformity. You're definitely touching on it, so.
yeah. I'll just let others speak though. My words are failing me today.
So break the terms to get down a little bit. They're similar terms, but they have very different implications and meanings.
I think in the aspect of becoming one, because that's kind of what unity implies, there is that same harmonizing feature that you mentioned a lot with the bringing together of what is good. I think often with uniformity, when you're focused on all being on the same page rather than being good, you kind of don't necessarily, there's I guess a missing of context entirely when it comes to what you're even trying to do. I feel like unity has a purpose. When you're becoming one under something, it's normally to an end. You're highlighting good and you're discarding bad, right? But for normally an end. With uniformity, it feels like the focus itself is agreement. It doesn't matter, if we're agreeing or disagreeing on, the actual things we are agreeing or disagreeing on aren't as important as us being in agreement. Whereas with unity, it is normally unity unto something.
Relational.
Yeah.
Unity more relational, perhaps. Whereas uniformity is more cookie cutter, or just an idea, perhaps.
Maybe you could say that uniformity is when it all looks the same, but unity is when it all yields the same fruit. So unity may come across, in fact, I think it often does seem as if you have a lot of disparate elements, but they all produce the same thing. While uniformity, which ultimately depends on some kind of agreement, and the way we're considering agreement here, it may all have a very similar, maybe even seamless appearance in the way it works, but it either doesn't produce anything at all, or it eventually leads to contentiousness.
Okay.
Because there's an effort to keep things uniform, which is really not the goal in the beginning. It's to produce something.
So let's look at the word uniform. You just use it as an adjective. Think what's the noun? What is a uniform?
It's clothing.
That's it? You got a uniform on?
I don't.
Representation.
But you have clothing on.
It's a type of clothing.
Okay. What type?
It can be a lot of different types of uniforms.
What are some examples of uniforms?
Like a school uniform, or like
Okay.
a army
Yeah.
uniform.
Military?
Yeah.
What do uniforms do?
They like represent who you are or what you're doing.
They do represent something, yes.
What you're a part of.
They can indicate that.
That's all I got.
I mean, as Noah said, if you were 100 feet away and everyone was wearing the same uniform, they all look the same. Yeah? That's uniformity. So there's very much an outward. Now, outward appearance is not necessarily just the visual aspect that's the obvious, but there's also uniformity by way of, I think what Jaden indicated, in belief. So there's a creed, right? And typically, uniforms also carry creeds, interestingly enough, right? Because everyone needs to say and do the same thing. What is lost in uniformity? Personality. You're not your own person. You are made to be, by essence, by way of the uniform, like everyone else, or by creed, like everyone else.
What does creed mean again?
Like I believe this, I believe that, I believe this. These are the things that I know and that I believe and that I do. That's a creed. That I declare are this or that. So this is particularly meaningful to, a better understanding the way that religion works and the way that the various differentiations within Christianity work, and in the context of what we've read here in the Analects, like various areas of the China during this time period that may have had certain very strict ways or beliefs in doing things. And so, anyway, the difference is quite dramatic. And so, uniformity has somewhat paradoxically very different forms in different cultures and in different times. So right now, uniformity by way of the bent of today's modern culture is tolerance and those types of whatever goes kind of mentalities. So everyone should think in that way, right? So unity, however, is something that I do believe gathers people together for a greater purpose. And they are united in that purpose. So, most Christians throughout the ages have read Jesus' prayer in John 17 and tried to produce something that is uniform, I have been a part of many or witness to and even part of organizations that write out what they call a unity statement. And that basically is a declaration of what they believe. It's a creed. So is that unity or uniformity? Because the act of producing and putting out such a document or communication is in essence to say, wear the same clothing that we do. You need to put on this outfit if you're going to do things with us. And the outfit is the things that you were saying that you believe or not. That is not unity. Therefore, it's an oxymoron. A unity statement has nothing to do with unity. It has everything to do with uniformity. Unity is something that comes from outside himself. And that's actually the way Jesus prayed. Jesus was not praying that all believers would come into agreement with one another. He was praying that they would come into unity within their relationship to the Father and himself in the same way that he and his Father were at unity with one another. Most people take criticism at all and constructive criticism, or what we referred to earlier as disagreement, or maybe there's something more, maybe there's a better way, as something that is opposing them, rather than saying, well, let's reason through this. In other words, let's let this soak in the pot a little bit and see if we can come out with something tasty. Something that works well, that harmonizes. One of the reasons that I like the illustration of soup so much is because it requires heat and time.
I think, I don't know if the analogy works too well, but often with uniformity, I think of even just rock formations, but specifically like, I don't know if you've ever seen those natural, like very cubic rock sequences that form naturally in caves and whatnot, very orderly, all of them very like perfectly cubed. It's kind of a cool thing. It's certain stones, but a lot of times with uniformity, that's what I often think of, these distinct separate blocks, each I suppose coming across the same way and having that same outward appearance, but there's still, it's interesting that you say that, like, from a distance they all look the same, because they do, but I think the main difference is that they aren't the same. At the end of the day, I think uniformity masks the fact that even if you do try to outwardly make people the same, internally there is no getting rid of personality. They are still individuals, and however much you mask that, there will still be a separation between. But when I think of unity, I even think of how sand is made. When rocks clash against each other, in water or whatever else, they become part of something, like sand. There is no I guess you could technically say distinct different grains of sand, but who knows what rocks are coming from what, right? That's irrelevant. There is no individual person there per se. You are all of the rocks are becoming part of one larger thing, to where personhood is not the focus at all, really. It's the what they are becoming.
Yeah, it's hard to get better than the soup example.
Yeah,
It's pretty good. I mean, it in terms of, because it's something coming together that functions and is received as one thing.
Each part's different. But
Right.
they come together to form something that, as
Right.
a whole, is, each thing has a part to play.
Music is a lot like that too. You know, one illustration that I've used in conversation with others who have, want to potentially press their ideal of uniformity. You need to believe and think like I do, basically, is related to, an orchestra, which is made up of many members and many different kinds of instruments, different types, not just kinds. So you have, for instance, in brass, you might have a tuba, a baritone, a trombone, a French horn, a trumpet. All those make up brass, and there are many others. And each one of them are given a different part to play in an orchestra, but brass is not the only section of the orchestra. There is the percussion, which is made of the drums and the timpani and the cymbals and all kinds of clanging noises, but all in a different part, with a different part to play, with a different sheet of music to look at, and different notes to read. So then there's the woodwinds, and then there's the strings. And how would it be that someone who plays the flugelhorn in the brass section would come over to the one who is seated at the seat of the violinist and say, well, your music is wrong. Your sheet music doesn't read like mine. And the notes you play are different than mine. So you're wrong. You shouldn't be in this orchestra because you're not playing the right music. Here, look at mine. See? Look, when I'm playing, you're at rest. Well, you're supposed to be playing when I'm playing. That's uniformity. Unity, however, is when each member of the orchestra, regardless of the section that they play in, or the instrument even individually, because even within the line of 4 trumpeters, you will have first, second, and third parts, none of which they are exactly the same. One may have a solo, another may play in the background. One may rest while another plays, even in that one section. So those kinds of differences very much highlight the individualistic nature of what comes together as a whole. And does any instrumentalist in the orchestra direct the other? No. There are still yet 2 above them. Even in the highest chair or the lead of a section, you have the director, who is like the Holy Spirit, giving direction and tempo marks as to whom should play what part, at what time, at what tempo, at what volume, at what, and with what force and energy. Yeah? So who then is above that?
Composer.
The composer, the architect. So those are things to keep in your mind when it comes to, because mankind in his governments and in the way that he leads those things or tries to govern over those things always tends to press for uniformity, to make everyone else like himself. And that's why we very much need something more than that. Jay did an illustration with the rocks. Certainly there is the grinding together to become something that's not so personal. It is of our person, yeah, but it is not personal. The sand is made of many, coming from one though, ultimately broken down, clashing together to become another form of something. We see that in the realm of science and nature quite a bit, even in the different forms that, for instance, chemical forms, structure-wise, that something like water can take, right? Ice is still H2O, right? So is vapor, but it's taken on a different form based on the environmental influences that are around it. So anyway, we've probably taken the illustration too far. But this is a good one to keep with you and to remember every time that you're cooking.
Yeah, I think the analogies failed me, but what I was trying to emphasize with my point is that with uniformity there is no refinement. That's the thing that really stuck out to me between the difference between the two. When you are submitting to this same creed, there is no growth. It is stagnant. That's why I was thinking very much of the rocks in a line. But with unity, there is you could call it a clashing, but it really isn't that. It's this desire to become one, and with that, a refinement of all.
Mm-hmm.
I think that orchestra example works pretty well, even of
Well, I'm in harmony.
Exactly, but
For
also
sure.
even in terms of, while no one can come and say, look at my sheet of music, you're playing wrong. You
Mhm.
can very much hear if you're a good, listener, if you are out of tune with the rest of the band or not, with the rest of the orchestra. And I think that's really why the rocks came to my mind, but I do agree the analogy isn't quite as good. But it's just the refinement aspect of unity that has personally stuck out to me, and I was trying to figure out a good way to verbalize that.
Well, sometimes we look at refinement too coarsely, and not necessarily as a greater work. And that's why, when you think of that individual note or key that is played, but when it can be sharp on its own, but when it's brought together, nothing is really taken from it. It becomes something else. See what I'm saying? It's nature. What it is by its own essence changes. And it becomes something altogether new. Everything does. So in a sense, the tomato is not refined, it's transformed into something altogether new, right?
Mm.
And I think that's what I really appreciate about the way that we can look at that in relationships. Sometimes we think that it is our duty or someone else's duty unto us to grind on us and refine us to make us better. But in reality, we are meant to walk together in such a way as to mutually together become something that neither one of us were. And that's different than me carving away at Benji's shortfalls. That is actually me walking in life with Benji in such a way that his shortfalls, in a sense, melt off. Not because I carved them, but because we're something together that we were not separate from one another. Does that make sense? That's
Yeah.
more of that transformative process. And I think we'll talk about this. The themes here are very interesting because we'll talk about this later tonight too in the operation of faith. And that the goal is something that we have not yet realized yet, but we are being transformed together into this greater thing. And so much of it is very much individualized. Our minds can't help that to a certain extent without a certain discipline being applied, because the culture of the day is very individualistic. It's very self-focused and self-centered to view everything that's going on around you, with you, where you're going, who you're with, all those things from your own perspective rather than from something that is greater. In the same way that Naomi prayed in relation to the head, who is Christ. And Christ is the whole, not just the head. So that's the very interesting thing that we see in religious practice is these definitions and separations, when really there's supposed to be a unity. We're not all heads. We're not all arms. We are one body. That's, if we were all heads, then we're all trying to be uniform. But if we're one body, that's one unit. Make sense? Anyway, we've probably exhausted the topic now. So, any other thoughts?
I think it's cool to consider the what's the word? The way that Chinese music has worked since ancient times, and it still is what is characteristic of Chinese music, is it's mostly built on what's called a pentatonic scale, which means that there's 5 primary notes they use in the scale, which means it's a lot more limited than the 12-tone scale that has been used in the West. But it also means that it is far more readily harmonious, because there aren't notes that in the pentatonic scale there are not notes that are a half step away from each other or that can collide in such a way. Like if you have any experience with the piano, if you just like play a E and an F next to each other, for example, they clash.
Mm-hmm.
Like they sound extremely dissonant. So the real criticism you could offer towards like an exclusive use of the pentatonic scale is that it's not diverse enough. And what that makes me think of, as far as this discussion goes, is that in unity there is an appreciation of diversity, but diversity, and I'm not bringing this into any kind of political topic or discussion. It's not meant to hint towards that at all, but diversity is not necessarily the end.
To be diverse.
Yeah. Just because we acknowledge diversity in unity, the point is not to make things more diverse per se. That's missing.
It's actually to make them more united.
Right. But
Complementary
yeah.
of one another.
Obviously, the appreciation of diversity comes from a place of being able to acknowledge one another's differences and still harmonize. But again, you don't want to overstate or you don't want to go too far in the direction of promoting diversity. And when I see the way that something like the pentatonic scale works in Chinese culture, it is very selective. It's very limited because they use only these 5 notes in whatever scale they're in. But that is that's unto the end, or it's for the purpose of the harmony of the music. And so you could say, I mean, someone else could argue that maybe there's too much uniformity in that dependence upon the pentatonic scale, but the thing that is easy to miss is that the point is not to try to make things less uniform or try to make things more unified even. But those are things that come as a product of pursuing a higher vision of what it looks like to work together onto something. And so even this topic of unity versus uniformity, or even agreement versus harmony, are things that are not meant to themselves even be pursued as some greatest end. I think, as with many other things, they are themselves a product of pursuing something greater than themselves, in the same way that we can consider something like the fruits of the Spirit, or things that come as a result of a life that is lived in submission to or according to the law of the Spirit of life. So you desire the fruits, but you don't give them an inordinate amount of your focus and attention. There's something greater than them that actually produce them, if that's making sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even from a fruit and vegetable standpoint, in soup making, the fruits are not individual lives and, personalities. They're byproducts of something that are meant to be used in whatever way that the chef designs, the creator. And so, if we are God's garden and God intends to produce fruitfulness in us for his own use and for our mutual enjoyment, then, how and when he chooses to draw and to put to use certain fruits or gifts or whatever, if you want to, I think there's a difference between gifts of the Spirit and fruits of the Spirit, so that's a whole nother discussion there. But yeah. Well, the next one's short, so we can look at it. Jaden, if you'll read that, and then Isaac, read the second part.
Zagong asked, "What would you make of a person whom everyone in the village likes?" The master said, "I would not know what to make of him." "What about someone whom everyone in the village hates?" "I would still not know." "Better this way. Those in the village who are good like him, and those who are not good hate him."
We see again a suspicion of public opinion voiced in 12:20, 15:28, 17:13, and 17:18. This is related to the deeper problem of separating appearance from substance that motivates both Confucius' suspicion of glibness and flattery and his tendency to favor native substance over refinement. These themes also appear in 1325 and 1327.
So this valuation is really rooted and seated in what the meaning or essence of good is. Confucius would not call those who are good lightly, and he's indicating how they think and how they live. So those who are living in the way, if they like him, then I would know what to think of that person. But if there are those who are not living in the way, and they don't like him, well, that's probably because they're not living in the way. That makes those things pretty obvious, and that is also kind of helps unfold the idea there of the difference between native substance and refinement. Interestingly, it kind of touches those things where someone can look good on the outside. You can wear a uniform, right? But you may not have that greater purpose within you. And there's something mentioned as he does here, several other Analects, where that differentiation is highlighted. Not only by the way of who the observer of a life is, the public opinion, but also the difference between native substance and refinement. Native substance, I think, is one of those things that's kind of defined in the glossary of terms, right? Yeah. Zhi, is that how you say it?
It's spelled
Z-H-I.
Yeah.
Right on there.
You're a little.
Huh? Yeah. Native substance refers to the moral stuff that a person brings to the process of acculturation, probably consisting of both inborn qualities and characteristics developed in early childhood. Although Confucius felt that a balance between native substance and cultural refinement was ideal, his dislike for hypocrisy at times caused him to place more emphasis on the importance of native substance. Hypocrisy then would be pretty easily understood as that which puts a front up, makes it look like something that it's not, or presenting oneself or a person presenting themselves as something that does not match their character and way of life. So in this Analect we see a better way of discernment. So what would you make of a person who everyone in the village likes? Well, I don't know. Who are the people that like him? Why do they like him? For what reason? Well, okay. Well, then what about the guy that everybody hates? Well, why do they hate him? Who is it that hates him? Tell me not the person's name, but the type of person they are. What type of people hate him? That tells me something. That's what he's saying. Do you see how that's different when you're coming to evaluation? Everybody doesn't like this person at Granny's. Well, why? And who? What kind of people are they? So that's not just well, they don't really understand him. That is coming from a perspective of life and a way of doing relationships. So I met a lot of people, referring to Emmanuel again, that didn't like Emmanuel at all. Why? Because he always walked around with he carried a standard with him. And who didn't like that? Well, the people who didn't want that standard applied to their life. So when I was taken in one time, this was early in my relationship with Emmanuel, and I had a lot of trouble with Emmanuel. I was having a lot of difficulty with the standard that God was bringing forth in his life. And as a young man, a young father, and a very religious-minded person, God was really undoing a lot of what I understood in life. And not just through Emmanuel, through many other circumstances too, but Emmanuel was particularly unpalatable because he was odd and sharp and very different. So I had a lot of difficulty with that. And that was not for a short period of time. And so not long after the Lord had initiated our small community, and I was being rubbed on quite a bit by Emmanuel to the extent that I was always having to process something, work through something. And I remember one night in the early evening, I got a call, and it was Emmanuel, and he was out in Pflugerville at some people's house in some spiritual fellowship. And this was after some pretty major events. It was actually after Corbett and was sent from Sam Solin's group as an apostle, and all those things happened. And then he had left basically Robert kind of in charge of some things or whatever else. And then Robert was insisting that Emmanuel move in with them. And then there came this disagreement. And they all were against Emmanuel. And I wasn't a part of any of that. I didn't even know what's going on, but I got a call. And Emmanuel was like, I need you to come pick me up. And actually, I think it was Robert who called me and said to come get him. And he put Emmanuel on the phone, and Emmanuel was really quiet, and I didn't understand. I just knew that whatever. So I got there, and they're all in the living room, and I was like, what is going on? And I had this whole situation explained to me. And it was all putting Emmanuel in a negative light, as if he had done something wrong. And I didn't know what was right. My thoughts going in were, well, this guy is pretty sharp and disagreeable most of the time, and he's probably finally getting the product of the way that he acts about things. But I sat down and I listened. And I knew instantly, oh, wow. They don't understand the way that he thinks at all. They think like this. They are making decisions in this way. And their conclusions have come from that way of decision making. And there's nothing right about that. And so I let them know that. And we walked out. And that was that, and that was an interesting start of a different set of events. But I had observance of people's lives. I'm not talking about me having some great discernment. That was not the point at all. It wasn't that even my decision in that was right or wrong. Emmanuel years before had some same observation of my life. And when we began to be closer in relationship, and then later on, he was like, man, you would probably not want to have heard the way that people on the street and other people around ministry talk about you and your dad. And he wasn't gossiping. He just said, it's not a good opinion. And he said that really troubled me for a long time, because that all sounded really negative about you. But he says, but then when I got to know you and how you did things in life, I knew that those things weren't true. That didn't reflect who you really are. And so, that's this is some wonderful wisdom by way of how to have true discernment. It's not personal discernment. It is observing life. A lifestyle that enables you to understand how people garner their own opinions of other people and what motivates them. What's motivating not the person, what's motivating their opinion. And most often, it's their own way of life, their own personal perspective in life that is. So that's why his definition of, well, if good people are saying this guy's good, then I know something about it. But if bad people are saying this guy is bad, then I don't know if they're right. And if bad people are saying he's good, well, I don't know if they're right, if he's really good. And if good people are saying he's bad, then I probably know he's bad. That's the opposite of this, right? So, that's very good practical wisdom for relational discernment. And, when you're taking observation of other people in life, and especially those who may or may not be in positions of influence, yourself included, and whether or not someone is worthy of your allegiance or your following. So there are those who are. But how and why? How do you determine that? How do you come to that conclusion?
I was in Safeway the other day, and this lady, she was kind of walking towards me. She had a mask on, and these were like thoughts that were happening, not necessarily that I was directing, but I realized, like, oh, I know everything I need to know about her because she's wearing a mask. Right? I mean, that was kind of the feeling that I had going on inside of me. And as she got closer, she smiled the kindest smile at me with her eyes. Right? And I just was like, man, like, I was so quick just to rush to judgment that I knew something because of one thing, right? That I, was arrogance, right? I mean, I just completely missed it. And anyway, seeing that smile come through with her eyes, I was just really convicted of like, man, don't rush to judgments. You know,
Mm.
be a little curious. You know, and I
Mhm.
think